The federal regulatory process has a lot of confusing pieces, with varying and mysterious overlap. This video is an introduction to the process that cuts through much of the confusion by emphasizing key statutes that underlay the jargon and data structures. These are the main regulatory production centers. This video focuses on federal agencies, but Congress and the judiciary are important too. The two broad types of agencies we need to understand are executive agencies, whose heads are part of the president's cabinet, and the independent agencies. Both types can issue rules subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, APA, which is the kind of regulation emphasized in this video. Although outside the APA, guidance and recommendations can also be important. Antitrust regulation is often on a case-by-case basis. Here is the chronology of APA rulemaking.
In the U.S., after Congress passes legislation, like the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011, also known as FSMA, the President signs it into law. Under FSMA, it's up to the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, to create rules to implement the law and make expectations clear. Thankfully, the notice and comment rulemaking process is open and provides the opportunity for the public to participate. Here's how it works. First, the FDA issues a proposed rule, which is published in the Federal Register and available on regulations.gov, so individuals, companies, and government officials worldwide can review it and send comments, typically over 30 to 90 days. This means anyone can have a say. Next, a final rule is published, along with responses to significant comments and any revisions.
These are the key statutes and executive orders that are the reasons behind many of the processes, jargon words, and data structures. These are rules for the regulators as they create rules that ordinary individuals and organizations must follow. Here are the titles of these statutes and EOs. Administrative Procedure Act, Regulatory Flexibility Act, Regulatory Planning and Review, Regulatory Budgeting, Paperwork Reduction Act, and the Congressional Review Act. OMB Circular A4 is the how-to guide for regulators to comply with EO 12866. For our purposes, the APA is about notice and comment requirements. The RFA requires rulemaking to involve participation of small businesses and organizations. EO 12866 sets analytical standards and requires executive agencies to submit their more important rules to the White House for review, particularly by OIRA, which is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within the OMB. The PRA established OIRA and requires tracking of paperwork burdens. The CRA is about selected rules for congressional review. Now let's distinguish stocks from flows. Flows are additions and subtractions from the stock. Congress passes public laws that get added to the U.S. Code, which is the collection of all public laws from the past and still in effect. Agencies publish rules in the Federal Register that add or delete text to the Code of Federal Regulations. Take the example of the Joint Employer Rule from the National Labor Relations Board. It especially affected the franchising industry, where you have some companies that create brands and other intellectual property and partner with local franchisee businesses who obtain retail space and hire retail employees. This is a screenshot from the beginning of the rule in the Federal Register. See how it indicates the part of the CFR that is to be edited. Scrolling to the bottom of the same rule, here are the exact edits to be made to the CFR. Now let's go to that part of the CFR. Title 29 has the labor regulations. Part 103 includes, among other things, a definition of a joint employer. If we click on joint employer, we see the definition of joint employer. The point of this regulation was to get away from the common sense definition so that the many franchisee employees would in effect be employees of the corporate franchisor, even though the franchisor works on intellectual property and hasn't even met the people working at the local retail establishments. So the agency had to edit the CFR to remove the old definition and put in a new one. Now let's go back to the Federal Register item we had earlier. It refers to the public law that gives the NLRB the authority to so edit that part of the CFR. In this case, the statute is the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. Here is the statute. Congress wrote this part years ago, and the then president signed it. Note that it is a pure coincidence that employer is defined in Title 29 of the U.S. Code, while joint employer is defined in Title 29 of the CFR. Usually those are two different numbers. Now that we know the statutes, we can easily track regulatory data sources and the jargon that goes with them. We have a website for the stock. You already saw one of the websites for the flow, the Federal Register. But there is also regulations.gov and reginfo.gov. These are separate websites because of the statutes. APA is emphasizing the comment process. Regulations.gov takes the comments and links them with the proposed rule and with the final rule, if there is one. It is for all the agencies that are making rules. Reginfo.gov is from OIRA. As such, it is centered around White House Regulatory Review and the Paperwork Reduction Act. Let's look at the PRA inventory that you can access at reginfo.gov. There are over 11,000 groups of federal forms that are tracked. Here I aggregate the annual hours burdened by agency. The first entry says that taxpayers are spending over 7 billion, with a B, hours per year filling out and keeping records for IRS forms. Also high on the list are the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. To give you further insight into the PRA inventory, let's investigate the forms that make up the 7 billion IRS hours per year. Again, I have sorted in reverse order of forms. The infamous individual income tax return, especially Form 1040 and supporting schedules, is 2 billion hours with a B. Business and employer returns are high on the list too. There are also websites motivated by the RFA and the CRA. The last two listed on the slide are not government sites. They are useful sites in terms of gathering some of the information already mentioned. regrodeo.com watches the Federal Register for proposed and final rules. When they see one that estimates a regulatory cost burden, as EO 12866 urges agencies to do, the website records the number. It does the same with paperwork estimates reported in rules. These are different from the PRA inventory I showed you. Regrodeo is showing the hours it takes to read and comply with the rule, which may not involve any filling of federal forms. Policy integrity is interesting because it tracks rules in court after they are finalized. They are only doing this for major rules. During the Biden administration, there were almost 13,000 final rules. It would be nice to know which are the more important ones. Again, it can be confusing because the statutes differ in how they do it. Sometimes rules are called major and other times significant. These are not words from the people and businesses that have to obey. They are coming from the statutes. Major rules are a designation under the Congressional Review Act. Significant rules are a designation under EO 12866. That EO has a couple of definitions of significant, one of which is economically significant. Economically significant is also a designation under the Regulatory Flexibility Act. It would be nice if that designation was closely related to 12866, but I have seen a great many regulators claim that their rule is economically significant under 12866, but not under the RFA. Some good news is that the various statutes provide analysts with a number of tools to find genuinely important regulations. reginfo.gov shows 12866 meetings for a rule, which means that interested parties had a meeting with OIRA and the regulators to discuss how to write the rule. Interested parties can also submit comments through regulations.gov. Comments are more common than 12866 meetings, although most regulations get 0 comments. Comments from the Office of Advocacy get special legal status and have proven to be a leading indicator of a rule that stops before it becomes final or gets reversed by a future administration. The office has a presence around the country where it asks small businesses, wherever they are, about their concerns about rules and other federal policies. Many of the advocacy comment letters deliver those findings to the rule makers in Washington. Page views on the digital version of the Federal Register are also tracked. Large numbers of page views is an indicator that a lot of people have an interest in the rule. I already mentioned regrodeo.com. Their compilation of 12866 and PRA burden estimates can also sort rules by importance. Finally, rules can be filtered by CFR section. A lot of rules are editing the same CFR section, such as the section about operating drawbridges. Without even reading the title of the rule, let alone its main text, you can filter out drawbridge rules just by using the CFR field.